Welcome back. This is going to be the second video. And remember, what we're talking about is that you're not as anonymous as you think online. The last time I introduced the idea that when people feel anonymous, whether it's in the online world or in the offline world, their behaviors differ dramatically than if they can be identified. And then I made the argument that what anonymity affords the online user is this sense that they cannot be held responsible for their behaviors because either they can't be caught by the authority figures, or sometimes they can't be identified by other people as well. Like, for example, cyber victims, for example, may not know who they are. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow people to feel like they can do or say whatever they want online. And this applies to like unethical behaviors such as cyber attacking somebody, all the way to illegal behaviors such as sexting, cyber grooming, identity theft, downloading media online illegally, things of that nature. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you that. So basically what I'm going to do is my goal today in this particular video is to show you that you are not as anonymous as you think because of the way the internet is set up. So let's hit one of the big things. That's going to be computers, tablets, smart TVs, smartphones, video game consoles, etc. What's going to happen is that whenever you're connected online, you are going to be connected via some IP address. So the way it's going to work is that every machine that you're on, if you're hooked up to an internet, has an IP address. And what an IP address does is that whenever you log on, you can either log on to a static IP address, or your IP address can be moving around a lot. And everyone is connected to this. And what's going to happen is the IP address allows anyone who is logged on to that internet to know where their computer is, kind of thing. So if you look here, I know it's kind of hard to see because it's small, but if you look here, for example, this would be the IP address for, let's say, a computer wired into, let's say, like a college network. And if you even look down here, so this is another picture, something very similar, is that the IP address is that thing right there. And it's very easy to find. You can actually find it on your computer now. All you have to do is go into the MS-DOS prompt mode and click and type in this thing right here where it says C:/user/ and so on and so forth, and you type in like config, or in this case it's IPC config, and what's going to happen is it'll just give you this information. It'll tell you what your IP address is, so everyone can look and everyone can see it. Now, what does it contain? Well, this is according to a source that is information based on IP addresses. It contains several things. So your machine, because you're connected to an IP address, we can get information about your machine. That information includes who owns and operates the network device, the computer's name, so every time you buy a new computer, for example, you have to name it, the location of it, the email addresses associated with that, and the location of the service provider. So what basically, I know that's technical, but what you can do with it is it gives you a lot of information. For example, it can give you a timestamp. It can say, for example, when you were logged onto that computer, or when you were using that IP address. It can also, if you download an image, it saves that and it can get to that. IP addresses can also get text documents, so things that you type like Word documents. It can even get emails. GPS location, so even if your IP address roams, so it changes every time you log onto your computer, for example, because let's say you go to Starbucks, and then later on you go to your office, and then later on you go to your mom's house or whatever, and your IP addresses change because you log on to a different web server, different internet service provider. What's going to happen is it can get the location of that, and also any other encrypted data that you may or may not have. So the IP address actually gives people a lot of information. So imagine now if you use your computer to, let's say, cyber stalk someone, all right? And someone files a police report and saying that you are harassing them. And if you said, oh no, you can't prove it's me, IP addresses go a long way at actually proving it's you. All right, it gets at timestamps. You can click on what you sent. You can click on what you typed, where you were, the time you were there, and so on and so forth, all from an IP address. All right. Now, I read one document that said that that's not enough. Like, you need more than just an IP address to prove any sort of causal link, but it goes a long way at kind of building a case from the ground up. All right. Now, what about other devices? You can say, well, you know what? What about smartphones, like apps? All right. So apps, you're not as anonymous as you think, even if you're promised anonymity. All right. So let me give you an example. Whenever you download an app from the App Store, I'm using iPhone language. Of course, this works for like Google Play and things on like Galaxies and stuff and Androids. But what's happening here is that it's going to require your credit card information, your phone number, your name, your email address, just to get the app downloaded. And once you download that app, if you're going to post or comment or do something in there, some apps now require phone numbers and Facebook logins to do that. All right. So for example, if you have like the ESPN app, if you're going to post and you just read a story and you're going to post something about that story, you're going to comment, it requires you to log into Facebook. And Facebook obviously has your name associated with it. Also, so let's get to two other examples. So what about anonymous apps? So apps that promise anonymity. Well, the first most is Yik Yak. Yik Yak is an interesting example. It's actually not anonymous anymore. But Yik Yak, the way it works is that you used to be able to just type whatever you wanted without your name being associated with it at all. Now you can't do that anymore. But let's pretend it was still anonymous. Let's just pretend you could type whatever you wanted. Well, what's going to happen is that whenever you logged into Yik Yak, you need a user ID to do so. Okay, that way they know your location and what kind of groups you were a part of. And what's going to happen is by logging in, the Yik Yak program on your phone, it communicates with a much, much larger server, right? That's what the server that makes Yik Yak run. And so what's going to happen is every time you're logged on, that server can trace that back to you, all right? So even if you're just like, oh, I never had to type my name's not anywhere on Yik Yak, guess what? It's not that case because someone has that information somewhere that says, for example, Steve Carlton logged onto Yik Yak from this time to this time on this date, and by the way, they typed this message. So even if your phone, by the way, even if you're using even your smartphone is not as anonymous. But guess what? Yik Yak got away from that. So Yik Yak got away from the anonymity stuff, and it actually moved to a case where anytime you wanted to type something, you had to type in your phone number. All right, so people stopped using Yik Yak because it was no longer anonymous. At least people didn't feel that way. So then let's move on to Snapchat. All right, Snapchat. So Snapchat's the same way as Yik Yak. Every time you log onto it and type something, it goes to a bigger server, and that server can locate basically your name and what you typed and stuff like that. But there's programs out there that can get away with that law enforcement could use if you decided to do something unethical or illegal. Like, for example, there's a program out there called MSpy, and what that does is it allows people to trace dates and timestamps for all media files, exchanges, videos, chats, content, everything. And so in MSpy, if someone were to, let's say, chat, or someone were to post an embarrassing picture of me, and I considered that to be like harassment, for example, I could actually, using this program, figure out who did it. All right. So smartphones. So let's go back a screen. Computers, you're not anonymous. IP addresses exist. Smartphone apps, you're not anonymous. Even if it's promised anonymity, you're not. Because there's always a bigger server that can link what you send and what you do to you specifically. All right. Same with texting. So texting, I did not know this, but there's actually a software out there called Text Plus. And what happens is any time that people text each other, someone else gets a copy. So as an example, this is what a lot of, my reading of this, a lot of parents do this to make sure that their kids are not communicating or hanging out or doing anything bad with the wrong people. But needless to say, if I'm getting text messages from someone, let's say like a fake phone or a second phone that no one knows about, I could actually record them with this. All right. Furthermore, like a phone call, your text messaging can be traced back to a single user. Whenever you sign up and get a cell phone, before you activate it, there's always a way to trace it to you, right? So I know when I bought my smartphone, for example, I had filled out this form that was basically my name, contact information, things like that. So therefore, my name is associated with a specific phone number, and that phone number, if someone has issues a warrant, for example, they can actually get my phone records, assuming a judge signs off on it, of course. So texting is not an anonymous thing either. All right. Now, this one should make more sense because it's kind of like, when you call someone, you're not anonymous. The only difference is when you call someone, you have your voice attached to it. If you are texting someone, your voice isn't there, but guess what? It's still an issue. And then finally, video game consoles. Video game consoles are interesting because there's a lot of just aggression happening. I'm not talking about in the game. I'm talking about like in the live message boards that are happening during the gameplay. All right. So people say, well, I can say mean things on video game consoles, but here's the deal. This can all be recorded. Your images, gameplay, chat, financial transactions. Let me give you an example. And there was a link to here so you can see it. There's an article that the NSA, the National Security Agency of the U.S., they were actually using World of Warcraft and Second Life. So Second Life and World of Warcraft are these massive multiplayer games where people complete missions and do things and live their life. But what's happening is that there's a big chat that happens, like a real-time chat where people are talking to each other basically via these messages that they're sending to everybody. And the NSA was actually using Second Life and World of Warcraft to spy to make sure people weren't conducting planning terrorist activities in these games. All right. And how did they know this? Is that the NSA, like, for example, they contacted the makers of Second Life and World of Warcraft. And from my understanding, they actually were able to connect to their much bigger servers. And with the full force of the law behind them, and they are the NSA, they were able to record people's conversations, see their gameplay, see what they were doing. So that way, if they found or suspected anyone of any terrorist plotting in the game, they could maybe have them as a suspect. I mean, I never know what happens to these things. I don't follow up on them. But needless to say, it can all be traced. All of it. All right? So let's conclude. Every piece of technology that is connected online is somehow traceable back to you. And that is the myth. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people will say, oh, I'm going to create a fake email account, a fake Gmail or a Hotmail account. I'm going to use that to log on to, let's say, like the CNN.com message boards, and I'm just going to let people have it. I'm going to yell at people, call them names for the stuff that they write and post. Well, guess what? IP addresses can be used to trace that back to you. Well, some people may say, well, I have Yik Yak, and I have, not Yik, that's a bad example. I have Snapchat, and I can take embarrassing pictures of people and Snapchat them, and people can see that, and then they'll disappear, and I'm safe and anonymous. Well, guess what? That's not the case either. Now, one of the things that you're going to think about is that this is a lot of time and effort. Like, who's going to take the time to get the software, to trace what I say, to link it back to me because this person felt bad and harassed? Well, I'm going to show you on the next one that there are legal ramifications for these types of things. And although it's not common for that kind of involvement in like the police and stuff, it is going to be something that happens. And I'm going to show you that on the final slide. So here's the SurveyMonkey page for the questions to make sure you were paying attention. And we just have one more presentation to give.